they're terrified of the domestic unrest, the potential for the regime to get directly attacked by domestic forces. So they're putting the kibosh on any of that right away and messaging that Israel failed, we succeeded, we're so strong. It remains to be seen whether anyone believes that straight up propaganda. I don't think there are many believers left in the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Airstrikes on Iran overnight, which Israel says targeted missile manufacturing facilities and other military sites. Now, the Pentagon have said that they were informed beforehand by Israel, but there was no US involvement in the operation. Let's find out more. Simone Ledeen is former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East and joins us now. Simone, thank you so much for staying up for us. From the White House's view, the US's view, was this response from Israel what you were expecting?
Well, from my personal perspective, I was waiting to see what the Israeli response would be. From our government's perspective, from our White House perspective, the Biden-Harris administration has been lobbying quite aggressively for the Israelis to have sort of a pared back response and focus solely on military targets, leaving out potential nuclear and energy, oil and gas sites, which is what they ended up doing. So I believe from their perspective, they're likely pleased by the outcome and by what sites were actually hit.
So you think this was a proportionate response?
Well, you're asking me for my opinion. The response. Let's just review. So Iran has launched two separate barrages of missiles against Israel, once in April and once in October. Notwithstanding the continued attacks against Israel's civilian population by Iran's terrorist proxies, Hezbollah and Hamas. So proportionate, when you're talking, that's the real scale and scope of things. No, it wasn't proportionate. And in fact, it wasn't really even enough, in my opinion, to establish a real deterrent against Iran. What it did do, though, was actually show that Iranian air and missile defense is essentially non-existent. Whatever there was has been demolished. So Israel has really demonstrated that they have the upper hand, and if they need to come back and do more, it would not be difficult for them to do so. That was very clear.
It's interesting you say that you think actually that wasn't sufficient to restore deterrence. What would be that wouldn't prompt further escalation?
Well, I think it's an interesting question that you ask. The most important thing that I believe Israel needs to do in order to restore deterrence is to remove the Iranian regime's capability to attack Israel again, and also withdraw their desire to do so. That's really what we're talking about here. So they've systematically dismantled Hamas. They've systematically dismantled Hezbollah. Hezbollah definitely still does have capabilities, but they're headless, they're leaderless. We estimate that they have 50% or less of their capabilities in terms of ability to launch attacks, launch missiles against Israel. So something along those lines with respect to Iran. Iran still has really significant revenue coming from their oil and gas trade, and all of that is still very functional. Their ports are still functional, so they're not really hurting yet, and they don't feel domestically. They don't feel any pressure on them. So I think there's a lot more that Israel could do that it's not doing. And unfortunately, I don't think, as I mentioned, I don't believe this is enough. And I think that we will see again, unfortunately, a retaliatory action against Israel, perhaps not from the Iranian regime directly, but through one of its many terror proxies.
Okay, so in terms of what does happen next, I mean, Iran now will be weighing up decisions. If that comes from one of their proxies, I mean, what would you be anticipating for or preparing for the US and Israel in terms of what might come next?
Well, I think we do need to look very carefully at the success of the drone operations that Iranian proxies have launched from specifically from Iraq, but also from Lebanon. We've seen also the Houthis in Yemen launch successful missile attacks against Israel and Israeli assets and American assets for that matter. So I believe all of those are on the table. Also, Syria. There's still a strong Hezbollah presence in Syria and an IRGC Quds Force presence there as well. So they have missile capabilities there. They have drone capabilities there. I think all of those are absolutely on the table, and I would be watching all of that very carefully.
So far, I must say that Iranian media seems to be sort of downplaying the impact of the strikes. Does that actually suggest that maybe Israel has done what it achieved, that this could now draw a line under this?
That's a great point, and I hope that it has. I hope that's what it means. Certainly, it shows that the Iranian regime is terrified, and they're signaling that they don't want to, at least directly from the regime, take another swipe at Israel. But as I mentioned before, that certainly does not mean that it won't have one of its many proxies act at its behest and attack Israel in an indirect way, in a way where the Iranian regime can avoid direct responsibility for such an attack. This is something that they've done over many decades against Israel, against us, against your troops as well. So I think all of those things are on the table, and I would look much more closely at what happens rather than what Iran says. The messaging that it's putting out right now is for its domestic audience overall, much more than it is for a global audience. They're terrified of the domestic unrest, the potential for the regime to get directly attacked by domestic forces. So they're putting the kibosh on any of that right away and messaging that Israel failed, we succeeded, we're so strong. It remains to be seen whether anyone believes that straight up propaganda. I don't think there are many believers left in the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Simone Ledeen, thank you, the former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defence. One of the things that we've been watching out for over the last few weeks, really, is both the UK and the US petitioning Netanyahu and Israel to exercise restraint. This could be a little bit of a success in the fact that what we know for now is Israel doesn't appear to have targeted nuclear sites, oil, gas installations. That is something that Biden decided to say publicly because he has been undermined quite a lot recently by saying things to Netanyahu, and Netanyahu just acts completely independent of what Biden said. So this may be a case where Israel has decided to either listen or on its own accord do as the UK and the US have suggested.